Life Audio.
The Bible Study Podcast, episode 896. Today, the Bible Study Podcast continues the study of the intertestamental period and First Maccabees with the second part of chapter 7. Welcome to the Bible Study Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. We will continue on with this part here in chapter 7 that's talking about this new king that arrived from Rome and what he's trying to do about the Jews. But first, a word from this sponsor. So you may remember in the first part of chapter 7, we get this new king who arrives from Rome, who defeats the old king and kills him and kills his regent who was ruling for him, and then is immediately told about these terrible things the Jews have done by the people who hate them. And so he sends down a new high priest, which he doesn't necessarily have the authority to appoint a high priest, and then also sends down somebody who is a trusted official. They are not successful in defeating the Jews. They, in fact, don't fight them. They try and persuade them that they're just friends of theirs, and they get the people who believe this new high priest and are killed, and then they have less trouble trying to convince anyone that they're the good guys after that point. And so they go back to the king, they say terrible things. The king sends somebody else to deal with this problem. Then the king sent Nicanor, one of his most honored officers who hated the Jews, with orders to exterminate them. Nicanor came to Jerusalem with a big army. He tried to trick Judas and his brothers by sending peace offerings. He said, "There need not be any quarrel between you and me. I will come to you with a small escort for a friendly private conversation." When he came to Judas, they exchanged polite greetings, but Judas's enemies were ready to kidnap him. When Judas learned that Nicanor's visit was part of a plot against him, he was afraid and decided not to meet him again. Nicanor realized that his plan had been discovered, so he left Jerusalem to meet Judas in battle near Kfar Salama. About 500 of Nicanor's men were killed, and the rest of the army escaped to the fort in Jerusalem. Sometime later, Nicanor went to Mount Zion. Some of the priests left the temple and, along with some of the leaders of the people, went to welcome him with words of peace and to show him the burnt offering that was being sacrificed on behalf of the king. But he ridiculed them and made them ceremonially unclean by spitting on them. He spoke proudly and angrily threatened them with an oath. "Unless Judas and his army are surrendered to me immediately, I will burn this temple down as soon as I return after my victory." And he left in a rage. The priests went into the courtyard and stood facing the altar and the temple. They started weeping and prayed. "Lord, you chose this temple to bear your name and to be a place of prayer and intercession for your people. Now take vengeance on this man and his army. Let them die in battle. Remember how they spoke evil of you, and let none of them survive." Nicanor left Jerusalem and set up his headquarters at Beth Horon, where the Syrian army joined him. Meanwhile, Judas set up camp at Adasa with 3,000 men. There Judas prayed, "Lord, the scripture tells us that when a king sent messengers to insult you, your angel went out and killed 185,000 of his soldiers. And now in the same way, crush this army before us today and let everyone know that Nicanor is being punished because he insulted your holy temple. Punish him as his wickedness deserves." The armies met in battle on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and Nicanor's army was defeated. Nicanor himself was the first to be killed in the battle, and when his soldiers saw that he was dead, they threw down their weapons and fled. The Jews pursued them all day long, from Adasa to Gezer. As they followed them, they kept sounding the call to battle on the trumpets. And from all the surrounding villages of Judah, people came out and attacked the fleeing enemy from the sides. This forced them back toward the Jews who were chasing them, and all of the enemy were killed in the fight. Not one of them survived. The Jews took the loot and then cut off Nicanor's head and his right arm, which he had extended so arrogantly. They brought his head and his arm to put on display outside Jerusalem. There was great rejoicing among the Jews. They set that day aside as a special day of celebration and decreed that the 13th day of Adar should be observed as an annual day of celebration. There was peace in the land of Judah for a little while. I love that subtle foreshadowing there at the end of for a little while, which is why this is not the last chapter in the book of Maccabees. But we have this new invasion, this new person who is sent not just to defeat the Jews, but to exterminate them. This has gotten very serious indeed. The new king has heard nothing but bad things about them and is trying to wipe them out. Now, at first, they try trickery. They try and trick Judas and his brothers and say, we're just here for peace. Can't we all get along? And they're planning on kidnapping Judas and killing him, one would assume. And the idea there is that Judas is providing excellent leadership, especially in battle, for the Jews. And if he were not there, the assumption is that things would go much worse for the Jews. But this plot is discovered. There always is someone who talks. And so Judas doesn't meet with them again. And so it's time for battle. And we get two different battles. One, a small battle near Kfar Salama, in which case 500 of Nicanor's men are killed. So we don't know how many men were involved in this battle. And we don't know the size of Nicanor's army. But then after that, Nicanor goes up to Mount Zion. So Jerusalem, with Mount Zion and the Temple Mount, is not where Judas and his army are right now. And so Nicanor can come and he can visit the temple. And when he visits them, they greet him peacefully. And not only do they say, we want peace with you, but look, we are sacrificing so that God will bless the king, right? The sacrifices on behalf of the king. Because they weren't necessarily at the beginning of this whole story looking for independence. They were looking for freedom of worship. They were looking for, we still want to worship our God our way. We don't want to have to worship Zeus and Aphrodite and all of the Greek gods that they were being forced to worship. So we can still work this out if you'll just give us that freedom. And look how we are still praying for the king so that we could be good, faithful servants, because they don't plan on being, or they don't think they'll necessarily be an independent country at this point. Just give us freedom of worship. And Nicanor does not react well. He does not look at this and say, well, isn't that wonderful? But instead, he is ridiculing them and even spitting on them so they become unclean, these priests, and arrogantly saying, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to tear this temple down unless Judas and his army surrender to me. Now, of course, if they surrender to him, he's sent here to exterminate them. So it doesn't seem likely they will do that. And if he comes back here, again, he's sent to exterminate them. So just tearing down the temple might not be the end. And so the priests at this point say, hey, Lord, deal with this man as is appropriate. Take vengeance on him and his army. Let them die. And so they're lining up for battle here, and Judas prays, and he remembers from the Old Testament when the Assyrians come in and the angel of the Lord wipes out an army of 185,000. Now, we don't know how big Nicanor's army is, but we assume it's more than the 3,000 that Judas has. And so he says, it doesn't matter how big they are. We've seen you in the past in the scriptures destroy an army that insulted you. Do that again. And that is, in fact, what happens. They do destroy this army, starting with Nicanor. And at the end, Nicanor, who was so proud, loses his head and his right arm. We don't know what he did with his right arm, what kind of rude gesture he made with it at the temple, but basically they hang his head and his right arm outside Jerusalem, and they have peace again for a little while. And with that, we're going to end this episode of the Bible Study Podcast. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at thebiblestudypodcast.com. And thanks so much for listening. I want to take just a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on this podcast. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
What do you do when your world is falling apart? How do you march when it would be easier to stay where you are and die? Join me every week on the March or Die podcast, and we'll discuss that and so much more.